So this video is about trying to get everything in a single frame and manipulate the image in your raw editor once you get home. And the way you'd probably do this, I'd say probably the best way, because you're going to have to maintain detail in kind of the brightest areas of your photo, right? So in this example, I might have went a little bit dark in this one. I've just grabbed these out of my older files, but we're gonna try and get this image in a single frame. So I've exposed for the outdoors, the outside the window, and we're gonna go ahead and do our best and try and bring this area up. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna compare this to my delivered photo, which is a photo that I lit. And I used lighting on this photo, so we're going to try and compare the final results of each one at the end. I've been wanting to do this video for a while now, and I thought it'd be a good time because there's a lot of ISO and variant stuff floating around on the internet right now. So this is kind of an interesting topic, I feel. So what we're going to do our best. What we did is, I said, we shot this in the field, exposing for the outside. We're going to do our best to try and manipulate this file in Lightroom to get it to where it's the best we can possibly do with a single frame. So what I did is I bumped up the exposure there, and I'm going to pull these highlights down, and you see I can really have some nice control over that. And so I'm going to bump up this exposure even more. And you might be saying, well, why didn't you just get more exposure in the field? Well, if you expose the window too much, you're going to completely lose that detail really quick. And so I don't think it says on this screen here, but I believe I shot this at f8 ISO 201/200 shutter speed. So that's how you would do that. You just shoot in the field, exposing for your outside or your window. Okay, so all I'm doing here is just bumping up the exposure. I'm bringing my highlights back down. And again, we're going to sort of see how this compares to the flash version. And I can tell you right now, this is looking pretty good from, in terms of what's possible to do. And I haven't even played with like the shadows yet, okay? And that's going to be a big part of this. So all we've done so far, we've bumped up the exposure. We've brought those highlights back down, so that's maintaining our window. We've got a little bit more exposure in the room, but we're trying to leave our window alone with that highlights exposure. I'll just do that again so you guys can see if you want to try this on your own. We're bumping up that exposure, but what's happening is that the window's going, so we're going to go ahead and manipulate that window back by using our highlight slider. And we're going to come down here and try the shadows now, and that's going to help us out too. And I'd say you don't want to go too far with this, and the reason for that is you almost want a little bit of that sort of those shadows. That's good. You can see that little shadow on that pillow. That's a good thing, and you don't want to have to bump your contrast up too much either. So I'd say right in there is looking good. We might want to give this a little bit of contrast later or something like that, but I think that's looking good. So in Lightroom, we also have this tone curve, it's called. It's a little window called tone curve. And I'm not sure how these work in concert, actually, if they work in concert or what, but you're only able to go so far on the highlights up here. I've pushed it almost all the way here, and as you can see, I can still mess with my highlights a little down here. So it's almost like an extra way to push things. But like I was saying before, I like, you see the corner of that bed, for example, right in there. I actually like the look of just bringing a little bit more shadow but down in there. And so we'll try this dark slider, and you can actually see what's going on in the curve there. And so the point here is you could mess with this a little bit, it seems like, to even go on top of your adjustments up here. And one of the problems we see with this file, which was expected, is there's a lot of noise back here. So we can come down here and find our detail window here, and we can go ahead and bump up this luminance noise reduction. I put it up to 50 right there. We might do some color noise. If you really want to do this properly, you might want to zoom in a little bit, but that's looking a lot better to me. And if you see some crazy blues or some crazy yellows at this point, you could play with these things. Or if you want a more warm photo or a cooler photo, you could go ahead and play with this stuff in this hue saturation area too. So that's a good, really nice controls there. But one last thing I want to put a little bit more contrast back in here. And like I was saying, that just gives us some of these natural shadows back. Because what we're doing is before we were taking out a lot of those natural shadows because we're sort of flattening everything out because we're lowering the highlights and raising the shadows. So that tends to flatten everything out, and it's maybe a little ironic, but we want to sort of reverse that. So I might pull this down a little bit on the highlights over here because I want those to come back a little bit with that view. But as you can see, the more you go, the more gray starts to come in your ceiling. You don't want that. And the last step I'll do here is some clarity. And I should note, I'm not like an expert on this. The truth is, I never do this, what I'm doing right now, like manipulating a single raw ambient file. So you can leave in the comments if you feel I did something and you feel it should be done a little different. I'd be happy to check out the way you guys do it if you're actually doing this. I don't know how many photographers, if any, do it this way, but that's more or less, I would say, the best that I can do. We're gonna do right now, we're gonna compare that to my lit file, and right now we're switching over to the file where I actually lit it with lighting, with supplemental lighting. This is going to be a different shutter speed and a different everything. So it's probably, I used 2 frames here, and you can see how, I mean, if you take one area, like say this pillows, these are kind of weird pillows in this instance, but you can sort of see the muddiness, and let me even get in a little bit there. So let's see that, and you see all that muddiness in there. And then you can see that, and it's just like, look at this pillow right here, and just how clean that is, and at the same time how natural that lighting is on there. Because what I do in my work, and you can go ahead and jump over to my website if you want to really work like this, I flash things because I have classes on how to do this stuff, but I flash these areas with one single flash. That's all I do, is one single flash in a shot like this. And then I go ahead and put back some of the natural shadows. You can see that right here. Because if you just use the flash frame, this would be all filled in. But I go ahead and put back some of the natural shadows. And you can see just how superior that is. I mean, look at that. There's all sorts of weird stuff coming out of there. There's a lot of noise. There's color problems coming out. There's even some weird pixels, if you can see that right there, sort of coming out. So that's the type of problem that you're going to be dealing with, pulling out all those shadows up like that to such a crazy degree. And let's go ahead and back out here and just look at them one more time. Just look at the window, the window threshold and stuff. Just look at the difference there, how much cleaner it is in the lit photo. So as most of you know, I really think even if you're a beginner, you should be getting into lighting. I mean, that's the way to go. I just thought this topic was sort of a fun look at this because it is possible to get things in a single frame, and there is that whole ISO and variance thing that's going around right now. And I heard about this about 4 or 5 years ago. It was interesting. I tried to find the blog post that I read this. I wasn't interested at that time because I'm interested in lighting, but it was Scott Hargis mentioning to a photographer who had a question, Tony Colangelo. I hope I'm saying his name right, but Scott was saying you can just do that all with a single raw file, like manipulating it up and down. And I thought that was really interesting, and I've always wanted to do a video like this, but I've just never put it together until now. So why don't we jump in and try that one more time. And so what I did, once again, same thing as last time, I exposed for the window, but we have a white room this time, which light will tend to reflect around and do a lot better job in a white room. So this might be the single frame ideal scenario. So we're going to go ahead and push that exposure up again. We're going to pull those highlights down, see how well it does. Didn't do as well that time because it can't separate out the whites from the actual window. You saw in that last case it did a lot better job at just isolating that window. So we're gonna have to pull this down. We might I'm gonna just get the window where I like it there, right about there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play with the whites in this one. Let's see how that works. Yeah, it's working okay. I'm losing the window a lot more, and that might make sense because, like I said, the window is the same sort of brightness as a lot of these white areas. So let's do some of the same stuff we did in the last one. We'll just continue to pull down these. We'll pull up the darks and pull up the shadows, and we'll pull down these highlights. See how that's working. I'll do my best here. it's looking really, really icky and like non-contrasty, so I'll probably pull some of these darks back down, something like that. And I might try to bump up the overall exposure more on this one, and maybe bring the blacks down a little bit. I think I went overboard on a couple of these sliders. It's just so difficult. I said this might be the ideal scenario, but I feel like we're losing the window more here, which I didn't think about. All right, so yeah, I feel like you lose the window more in these white rooms, but you're able to, if you're able to do that, it's looking good in this area. Okay, to me it's looking pretty good. And if you have any color problems, I'd say you could make it a little bit warmer, of course, with your white balance, or as you know, you could come down here to that saturation. So this is just a fun way to try and get things in a single frame. But let's jump over once again, and let's just see the photo that I lit with lighting and just sort of how much different that is. And so we'll jump over again in this case, and you can see how that's just, I mean, it's not even a comparison. Okay, so I think this sort of single image, I mean, I guess if you want to, one way to put it is taking advantage of ISO invariance, not really working in my opinion. I think this for me was about as much work as I spend on like putting two frames one on top of one another for my average real estate photography. I use one lit frame, and then I use an ambient frame, and I just sort of mix them together to get something like this. This was actually probably more than 2 frames, but you get the point. You can do it really, really easily. I feel probably easier than I was even getting to this point in here, and you can see how much superior the result is. All right, so always, always, always favor lighting. This stuff makes sense, right? Because when we see a news crew set up, when we see a Hollywood movies set up their things, that, you know, they're never using the natural light. They're always bringing these huge lights in, right? And that's because the quality is better, the production value is better, everything is better. So it sort of makes sense for us as photographers. Kind of the more light we pour onto things, like let's just say this over here, maybe it's a little flashy for you, and that's fine. You could just get in there and sort of brush in some of the ambient frame into that area. So it's never, as long as you have light in these areas, that's going to be the real power in your photography. Just get light there, and you can sort of play with the naturalness of it later after the fact. If you have light there, in my opinion, you're always better off. You can always sort of play with how much of that natural light you want to come in, but once you get the light in the areas, you're totally in control of the colors, and like the contrast is better, the clarity of the photo is better. And maybe the most important thing in this whole blog I save for the end, but I would say if you're going to be doing this type of photography where we were trying to push these files like crazy, we were trying to push them all the way, if you were going to try and do this in your photography, like this camera right here, I believe was like an old D90 camera, and the dynamic range probably isn't anywhere near like a modern day camera, like a really good, like a modern day camera, like say a D850 or something. So you might want to get like a top of the line camera if you're going to do something like this, because you're going to be able to push your files further. But the take home point I'd really like to end off with is, in my opinion, and people who watch my blogs know this, if you're lighting things, it doesn't matter if you have like a 15-year-old, you know, camera, as long as you have like about 12 or more megapixels, you're getting light in there, your photos are going to look fantastic. Okay, it doesn't matter that you have an older camera, older technology. If you're lighting your photos, it doesn't matter. But if you're going to push your photos with a single frame like this, I think it would matter a little bit, and I would tend to try and sort of spend more on my cameras if I was going to do photography with this particular style of pushing the photos. Don't forget to jump over to my website if you're interested in taking a photo like this to more of an area like this and not bringing that much equipment on site and not doing that much work at all, especially relative to this. It's just about the same amount of work. All I did to get this was get 2 frames, one for the lighting, and then I sort of used an ambient frame to just kind of naturalize the photo. So again, I'll show you on screen right now how to jump over to my website, and I have courses about how to make clean real estate photos like this. Okay, I hope that was an interesting discussion on trying to get everything you can out of a single frame for real estate photographers. I really don't think it's the way to go, in my opinion. It's a little bit too much work for a little bit of a not a little bit, but kind of a really bad result. So you're working a lot, but you're not really getting the greatest result, in my opinion. So if you can just see that comparison there, it's like no comparison at all. And yet I feel like the time it took me to get that was just about the time it would take me to light the entire scene and put it together in Photoshop, which is really is an easy process once you get the actions down and everything like that, those Photoshop actions. Okay, so thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.